The rain didn't just fall that afternoon. It washed away the last pretense of our normal life. My wife, Clara, was gone. Cancer had taken her quickly, quietly, leaving a silence in our suburban home that felt heavier than any sound. Our son, Liam, stood next to me, shoulders bowed, the grief of an 18-year-old an open wound. Clara was a planner, meticulous in everything. So when the attorney, Mr. Davies, called us in a week later, I expected finality. I expected her estate to be neatly parceled out, the house, the savings, the old Volvo. What I didn't expect was a footnote that changed everything. Mr. Davies read the will. Everything went to me, and then to Liam. Standard. Then, he cleared his throat and mentioned an additional property. A small, standalone bungalow listed under Clara's name in a different county, over 2 hours away. I almost laughed. A second house? Clara hated driving, hated clutter. It made no sense. Liam, however, perked up. He was starting his junior year in college, buried under student loans. A second house? Dad, we could sell it. That could cover my tuition and more. I looked at Liam's hopeful face, then back at the bewildered Mr. Davies, and I made a sudden, selfish decision. I told Liam, "It must be a mistake, son, a clerical error. We only have this house." The decision to conceal. Narrator. Why did I lie? Not out of greed, but fear. Liam's grief was raw. If I told him his mother, the woman who cherished honesty, had kept a massive secret, a second life tied to a second house, it would destroy the memory he needed to hold on to. I told myself I was protecting him. I needed time to understand what I was protecting him from. I quietly obtained the address and the key from Mr. Davies, swearing him to secrecy. The house was mine, technically. A hidden file on my desk, a small brass key in my pocket. My secret. The first drive and arrival. Narrator. I drove there the following Saturday. The town, Redwood Creek, was nothing like our suburban sprawl. It was small, quiet, and felt steeped in history. The house was tucked away on a dead-end street, small but charming, surrounded by overgrown roses. It looked loved, not neglected. This wasn't a forgotten storage unit. This was a home. I used the key. The first thing that hit me was the scent. Lavender and old paper. It was undeniably Clara's scent. Stronger here than it was even in our own home. The furniture was minimal, but everything was meticulously maintained. A small, old-fashioned writing desk sat in the corner. There was a faint indentation on the wall where a large picture must have hung. I realized with a jolt. Clara hadn't just owned this house. She had spent time here. Recent time. The spices in the kitchen weren't expired. A novel on the nightstand had a bookmark halfway through. The secret wasn't old. It was current. The unsettling encounter. Narrator. As I stood in the unfamiliar living room, completely disoriented, a soft knock came at the door. I opened it to find an elderly woman with sharp, kind eyes and a worn apron. "Oh, you must be the new owner," she said, her voice warm but a little wary. "I'm Mrs. Henderson, next door. I used to look after this place for Clara. She was a dear friend." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Yes, I'm George, her husband." Mrs. Henderson's expression didn't change, but her eyes darkened. She paused, considering me. I didn't realize she was married. She never mentioned a husband or a son. But she spoke of her family all the time. She called this place her sanctuary. I swallowed hard, the simple words destroying my image of my wife. A sanctuary from what? From me? Mrs. Henderson hesitated, then said, "She left something for you, George." I have it. She told me not to give it to anyone but the man who came looking for the house. Part 2. The cliffhanger. She led me into her tiny cottage, which smelled of baking bread. She reached behind a stack of books and pulled out an object wrapped in a thin silk scarf. It was a worn, leather-bound journal. She told me to tell you one thing, Mrs. Henderson whispered, her eyes serious. It's not about what's in the house, George. It's about why she had to leave it. Now read this. I clutched the journal, feeling the weight of 10 years of a secret life. I drove back to the empty, quiet darkness of my old house, the journal unopened. I sat alone in my study, the brass key to the second house, and the leather journal side by side. I knew that opening that book would mean facing a truth about my dead wife that I was terrified to know. What chilling truth did Clara's journal hold, and what did it mean about the life she lived right under my nose? Chapter 3. The Unopened Truth. I spent the next 3 days in a fog of guilt and paranoia. The journal sat on my nightstand, a silent, damning witness to a life I didn't know existed. I kept the garage door locked, half expecting Clara to walk in and ask why I was snooping. The grief had been a heavy blanket. The secret was a jagged shard of glass. My son Liam noticed my change. Dad, are you okay? You look like you haven't slept since the reading of the will. I mumbled something about tax forms. The lie felt heavier than the truth I was hiding. Liam's tuition deadline loomed, and every time he mentioned needing money, the image of that second, saleable house screamed in my mind. Finally, on the 4th night, I poured a strong drink, locked the study door, and picked up the leather journal. The cover was simple, unadorned. I opened it. The handwriting was unmistakably Clara's, elegant, looping, and familiar. But the content was that of a stranger. Chapter 4. The diary entries begin. Narrator. The first entry was dated 5 years ago, 3 months after our 25th wedding anniversary. I expected an affair, or perhaps a long-held resentment towards me. What I found was something far more nuanced and heartbreaking. Clara wrote about the weight of our life, not about unhappiness, but about the relentless routine, the suffocating politeness of a long marriage. She wrote that she felt like she was drowning in the role of Mrs. George, the perfect wife, the perfect mother. The house in Redwood Creek, she wrote, was her oxygen tank. Entry, May 14th. George and Liam are good. Their lives are full. Mine, I realize, had shrunk to fit the margins of theirs. The house at Redwood Creek is finalized. It's mine. My own space to be just Clara. Not a wife, not a mother. Just a person who can leave a cup unwashed for 2 days without judgment. She was spending 1 weekend a month there. A secret escape, a psychological lifeline. But as I read through the entries, the secret deepened. Chapter 5. The Strange Appointments. Clara wasn't just reading novels and relaxing. Her entries started detailing cryptic activities. She mentioned the project and frequent, strange appointments. Entry, November 3rd. The meeting with the collector was intense. He was aggressive about the timetable. I hate lying to George, but if I tell him, it jeopardizes the project. He wouldn't understand the risk. The small amount of money they offered is inconsequential, but the work is vital. I must protect it. My mind raced. Collector? Risk? This was far beyond a simple hideaway. I frantically flipped pages, my hands shaking, but later entries became erratic, almost panicked. She wrote about someone watching her. She mentioned installing extra locks and a veiled reference to a deposit box that only she knew the combination to. Entry, February 22nd, 1 year ago. I think they know I have it. I saw the same dark blue sedan outside the Creek house again. They're not after the house. They're after what I hid inside the house's walls. If anything happens to me, George must find the blue folder. Only he can complete the final step. The revelation of the hidden space. Narrator. The blue folder. The final step. The journal became a terrifying instruction manual. The most recent entry, dated only 2 weeks before she died, was a hastily scrawled diagram and a few chilling words. Entry. July 1st, final entry. Behind the large painting of the lighthouse in the study at Redwood Creek, the wall is hollow. The code for the lockbox is 180597. Tell George. Tell him it's a matter of life and death, not money. And tell Liam I love him. I slammed the book shut, my breath ragged. Clara hadn't kept a secret life because she was unhappy with me. She had kept it because she was involved in something dangerous. She had used the second house not as a sanctuary, but as a covert hiding spot. The painting she mentioned, the large picture whose impression I had seen on the wall during my first visit, was gone. And my wife's cancer? I suddenly had a sick feeling in my stomach that it hadn't been an act of nature, but something else entirely. Something related to the collector. I knew what I had to do. I needed to go back to Redwood Creek, immediately, and find what she had left me. But I had to be careful. If they were watching her, they might be watching the house now. I was no longer a grieving widower. I was a reluctant secret agent, stepping into my wife's unfinished mission. What deadly secret was hidden behind that wall, and who exactly was the collector chasing after it? Period. 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 Chapter 6. The Return to Redwood Creek. Narrator. I drove back to Redwood Creek on Monday, taking the scenic backroads route. I felt like a spy in a bad thriller, constantly checking my rearview mirror. Liam was at the university library, buried in books, unaware that his mother's secret house was now the center of a potential crisis. I still hadn't told him. I arrived at the bungalow just before noon. The exterior looked exactly the same, but the quiet no longer felt charming. It felt menacing. I parked 3 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, keeping to the shadows. I let myself in. The lavender scent and the quiet order of the house now felt like a cruel joke. Clara had created this perfect, tranquil facade to hide a whirlwind of danger. The large, empty square on the living room wall where the lighthouse painting had hung was my focus. Chapter 7. Breaking the Wall. The sound of the hammer against the drywall felt deafening in the silence. I worked quickly, prying away a small section. Behind the plaster, hidden in the space between the studs, was a small, high-quality metal lockbox. This was no casual secret. This was meticulously planned. The journal had given me the code, 180597. I punched in the 6 digits, and with a heavy clunk, the lockbox sprang open. Inside, there was no jewelry, no cash. There were 3 things: a thick, battered blue accordion folder, the blue folder, a nondescript USB drive, a small engraved silver locket that I had given Clara years ago, containing an old picture of Liam as a baby. I tucked the locket and the USB into my pocket. The blue folder, however, was too large to conceal easily. I opened it just a crack. Inside were copies of legal documents and something that looked like blueprints, with cryptic titles and annotations in Clara's handwriting. Chapter 8. The Interruption. Narrator. Just as I was about to study the contents, I heard the faint sound of a car idling outside. Not an engine running, but the low, steady hum of a car stopped on the street. Paranoia shot through me. The blue sedan. I rushed to the front window and cautiously peeked through the blinds. Parked directly across the street was a dark blue sedan. The windows were heavily tinted. I couldn't see the driver, but the car had been there for at least 2 minutes, unmoving. They were definitely watching the house. The collector was here. I had seconds to act. I slammed the lockbox shut, grabbed the blue folder, and scrambled into the back bedroom. There was a window that faced the overgrown backyard. I pushed the screen out and squeezed through the opening, dropping silently onto the rose bushes below. I didn't care about the scrapes on my arms. I just had to get away from the street. Chapter 9, The Escape and Mrs. Henderson's Warning. Narrator. I sprinted across the overgrown lawn toward the back fence, the blue folder clutched to my chest. I scrambled over the fence and dropped into the next yard. It was Mrs. Henderson's yard. She was standing on her back porch, watering a small potted plant. But her eyes were fixed on the blue sedan across the street. She didn't look surprised to see me bursting through her bushes. "They're early today, George," she said calmly, without missing a beat in her watering. "The tall one usually comes after dark." I froze. "You knew they were watching the house?" "Clara knew. She warned me. They've been coming and going for weeks. They're looking for that folder you're holding." Mrs. Henderson lowered her watering can and walked towards me. Clara was afraid of the collector. She told me if she ever stopped showing up, they'd intensify their search. She made me promise to keep her absence a secret for as long as possible. She pulled me quickly into her house. "You need to leave, now, through my front door. Don't go back to the bungalow. But first..." She grabbed a pair of sunglasses and a battered baseball cap from a hook. "Disguise. And George, listen carefully. Clara told me she hid a piece of the puzzle at your house. Your first house. She said it was hidden in plain sight. Something you look at every day." The cliffhanger. Narrator. I put on the cap and glasses, feeling a new wave of fear. Not only was the house at Redwood Creek compromised, but my own home, the house where Liam was sitting right now, was part of the secret. I looked down at the blue folder. It was thick with legal documents. One word was stamped clearly on the cover: patents. I bolted out of Mrs. Henderson's front door, back towards my car. I was carrying a folder full of my dead wife's secret patents, being hunted by the collector. And I had a hidden clue waiting for me back home, where my unsuspecting son was alone. What kind of patents was Clara hiding? And what dangerous industry had she been fighting? More importantly, what was hidden in plain sight in my own home? That's it. P.A. Chapter 10, The Uninvited Shadow. I made it back home late that afternoon, exhausted but running on adrenaline. I didn't recognize myself anymore. I was a man living 2 lives. The widower, comforting his son in the familiar suburban house, and the fugitive, holding a folder full of secrets from his wife's second dangerous life. Liam was thankfully still out. I locked the front door and leaned against it. The blue folder still clutched in my hand. I hadn't dared to look at the patents yet. My immediate, desperate focus was the warning from Mrs. Henderson. She said it was hidden in plain sight, something you look at every day. I swept through the house, my eyes darting over every familiar object. The living room, the grandfather clock, the trophy shelf, the family photos. The dining room, the china cabinet, the floral centerpiece. Everything was exactly as Clara had left it, hidden in plain sight. It had to be something so ordinary, so ingrained in our routine, that I never questioned it. Chapter 11, The Clue in the Frame. Narrator. I stopped in the hallway, where a large, framed wedding photo had hung for 25 years. Me and Clara, young and beaming. I looked at it every morning, hidden in plain sight. I took the heavy frame off the wall. I examined the back, standard cardboard held by 4 rotating clips. I was about to dismiss it as too simple, but then I remembered Clara's meticulous nature. I carefully peeled back the backing paper. It wasn't flat. There was something taped between the cardboard and the wooden frame. My fingers trembled as I unpeeled the paper. Taped there was a small, folded piece of paper, covered in Clara's elegant handwriting. It wasn't another diagram. It was a single, cryptic phrase. The key is not the lock, but the reflection of the past. Chapter 12, The Reflection of the Past. Narrator, a riddle. This wasn't like Clara. This was desperate. The key is not the lock, but the reflection of the past. I thought about the locket she left in the lockbox, the one with Liam's baby picture. That was definitely a reflection of the past. But what did it unlock? I rushed back into the study. I pulled out the locket and the USB drive. I knew the USB contained digital files, but it wasn't the key. I looked around the room, feeling defeated. Then my eyes landed on a large, antique wooden chest sitting at the foot of our bed. A chest we used to store winter blankets. It had a small, ornate brass lock. A lock we never used because the key had been lost years ago. I stared at the chest, then back at the wedding photo riddle. The key is not the lock. Wait, I remembered something. When we first bought that chest, Clara insisted on engraving the date we'd found it on the lock's faceplate, 8/1997. I snatched the silver locket and held it up. The inscription on the back of the locket was barely visible. C and G, 8/1997, the same date. But the locket wasn't a key. Then I turned the locket over again, looking at the tiny, intricate clasp. The clasp itself was a thin piece of metal. I inserted the sharp edge of the locket's clasp into the ancient brass lock on the chest. It didn't turn, but with a careful wiggle, the tiny metal piece slipped deeper into the mechanism, and with a soft click, the lock sprang open. The locket was the key, not physically, but dimensionally. Chapter 13, The Second Hidden Compartment. Inside the chest were the winter blankets, but underneath them, Clara had laid a false bottom. I lifted it out. Below the false bottom was a cavity, and inside that cavity was a small military-grade satellite phone. Next to it was a meticulously organized binder, labeled simply, Research. This binder was full of printed documents, mostly articles and studies related to advanced energy technology and corporate espionage. But the most chilling item was an official-looking document from a massive, multi-billion-dollar corporation called Aegis Global Energy. The document detailed a settlement agreement signed by Clara, dated 3 years ago, that legally obligated her to never disclose her patented work on a new, highly efficient, and clean energy reactor. In exchange, she received a large, confidential sum of money and was bound by a severe, non-disclosure agreement, NDA. My wife hadn't been fighting for fun. She was fighting a corporate giant that had suppressed her revolutionary clean energy technology. The patents in the blue folder were the proof of her invention. The satellite phone suddenly buzzed. It wasn't ringing. It was receiving a text message. I hesitated, then opened it. The message read, "We know you have the research. Leave it at the original location by dawn, or your son pays the price. The collector. Information." My whole body went cold. They knew I had the folder. They were watching me. And worse, they had dragged Liam into their deadly game. They weren't just after the patents. They were threatening my son. I had the blue folder, the USB, the research binder, and a burner satellite phone that had just connected me directly to the collector. I had to decide. Do I follow their impossible demand, Or do I use my wife's forbidden patents to fight back against the corporation that may have killed her? What was the clean energy technology? And how could it be so dangerous that a major corporation would resort to murder and kidnapping to suppress it? The text message on the satellite phone was a punch to the gut. We know you have the research. We know you have the research by dawn, or your son pays the price. The collector. I looked at the burner phone, then across the hall where Liam's bedroom light was out. He was asleep, oblivious that a shadow organization had placed a target on his back because of his mother's genius. The deadline was dawn, only a few hours away. I couldn't call the police. The threat was too specific, too immediate, and the enemy was a multi-billion-dollar corporation, Aegis Global Energy. They had suppressed clean energy technology, and I now suspected orchestrated Clara's death. The police would be too slow, and their involvement might escalate the danger for Liam. I had a choice: surrender, drop the blue folder back at the Redwood Creek house, possibly saving Liam's life, but allowing Aegis to bury Clara's revolutionary work forever. Fight. Use the few hours I had left to analyze Clara's research and try to understand what I was holding, perhaps giving me leverage to save my son and expose the truth. I chose to fight. Clara hadn't suffered and died for me to hand over her legacy. Chapter 15. Decoding the Patents. Narrator. I spread the contents of the blue folder and the research binder across my study table. I was an accountant, not an engineer, but Clara's annotations were meticulous. The key phrases kept jumping out: cold fusion variant, zero emissions reactor, and ambient temperature power generation. Clara had invented a clean energy source so cheap and so efficient it would make oil, coal, and traditional nuclear power obsolete overnight. This wasn't just a threat to one company. It was an existential threat to the entire fossil fuel industry. And Aegis Global Energy was their ruthless enforcer, the collector. The patents weren't just legal documents. They were a weapon capable of toppling the global energy infrastructure. This was why Clara kept the second house, to hide the one thing that could dismantle Aegis's monopoly. I inserted the USB drive into my computer. It contained a single, encrypted video file. The file name was For George Only. Chapter 16. Clara's Last Message. I used the password 180597, the lockbox code, to decrypt the file. Clara's face filled the screen. She looked frail, but her eyes were steady. It was recorded 3 weeks before she died. "George," she began, her voice hoarse. "If you are watching this, it means I failed. The cancer, it wasn't natural. They poisoned me with an aggressive, undetectable compound, a slow kill. They thought I hadn't filed the final version of the patents." She explained that after signing the NDA with Aegis, she realized they were never going to use the technology. They only wanted to bury it. She had secretly created a modified, far superior version of the reactor, the variant B, and filed the new patents under a shell company. They are after the blue folder because it contains the final untraceable legal copies. But that's not the real key, George. The real key is the USB. It contains the complete, executable, digital model of variant B. If you release that model, the world's top engineers can replicate it within weeks. Aegis loses everything. She paused, tears welling up. They will try to hurt Liam. You must take the USB and the sat phone. Go to the final point, a location only I told you about years ago on our honeymoon. It's the last safe place. If you haven't heard from me in 24 hours after this video, you must release the files. It's the only way to protect Liam. Chapter 17. The Final Point. Narrator. The fear for Liam warred with a righteous fury. Clara's death was murder. And the ultimatum was a lie. Even if I surrendered the patents, Aegis would always silence us to ensure the secret stayed buried. The only path to Liam's safety was exposure. I grabbed the satellite phone and typed a message into the notes. I'll release the patents to the press at 8 a.m. EST. If Liam is harmed, the file goes public immediately. I needed a plan. Clara mentioned the final point. On our honeymoon, we visited a remote lighthouse on the Maine coast. She always called it the place where our future began. It was a long 8-hour drive, but it was remote, and crucially, Aegis wouldn't know the connection. I packed the essential items, the blue folder, the USB drive, the research binder, the satellite phone, and a small backpack with cash. I had to leave before dawn. I went to Liam's room and watched him sleep. I made another difficult decision. I couldn't risk waking him and explaining everything. I left him a note, had an urgent business trip. I'll be back soon. I love you. A terrible lie, but necessary. The cliffhanger. I slipped out of the house just as the first hint of orange touched the sky. I was racing against the collector to a remote lighthouse, carrying the only thing that could save my son and change the world. As I pulled onto the highway, the satellite phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text message. It was a live audio feed. I heard a muffled voice and then, unmistakably, Liam's voice crying out, "Dad, where are you?" They had Liam. They had grabbed him while I was watching Clara's video. My surrender deadline had already been met with betrayal. The fight was now brutally personal, and the only leverage I had left was the USB drive. How do I use a digital file to secure the release of my son? And can I get to the final point before the collect tracks the satellite signal? Part 5. The Crying Game. The sound of Liam's voice, muffled and scared, was the most brutal sound I had ever heard. The audio feed was intermittent, a cruel reminder that the collector was in complete control. They hadn't waited for my dawn deadline. They had moved the moment I left the house. I pulled over violently to the side of the highway, my hands shaking on the wheel. They wanted the research. They had Liam. I typed a reply on the satellite phone's keypad, forcing myself to be calm and tactical. The sat phone gave me a direct, unmonitored line, but it also made me a stationary target if I stayed in one place too long. George typing. I heard him. The patents are secure. You hurt him, you lose everything. I know about the variants. You want the digital model, USB? I'll exchange it for Liam. Alive, in a public place. You have 24 hours to agree. If I don't hear from you in 1 hour, the files go public. I was bluffing. I got the file going public, but it was the only leverage I had. The silence from their end was agonizing, lasting nearly 50 minutes. Chapter 19. The Counteroffer. The satellite phone finally buzzed. A text. The collector. 12 hours. We are not interested in public places. Too many variables. You will drive to the coordinates provided. You will come alone. Do not contact anyone. You will bring the blue folder and the USB. Do not bring the sat phone. We will be waiting. If you fail to arrive on time, your son is compromised. The clock is ticking. The message was accompanied by a set of coordinates. Not the main lighthouse, but somewhere deep in the Pennsylvania wilderness, hours off my current route. It was a trap, a place where Aegis could control the outcome entirely. They had demanded the blue folder, patents, and the USB digital model. They wanted to erase all evidence of Clara's work. I deleted the message immediately. I couldn't go there. It was suicide, and it still wouldn't guarantee Liam's safety. I needed to move, and I needed to use the one advantage I had, Clara's foresight. Chapter 20, The Decoy and the Final Point. Narrator. Clara's video message echoed in my mind. Go to the final point, a location only I told you about. It's the last safe place. She had anticipated this. She had given me a safe zone and a way to fight back. I had to lead the collector to the wrong place. I needed a decoy. I found a quiet, wooded area miles from my current location. I grabbed a small, heavy rock, wrapped it in my handkerchief, and placed it in the empty backpack. I drove to the coordinates the collector had sent, but stopped them miles short of the drop site. I typed one last message on the satellite phone, giving them a time and location slightly different from their own, closer to where I was. Then, I wrapped the phone in the handkerchief and the rock, and threw the whole thing into a deep, muddy creek, silencing the signal permanently. They'd track the phone, find the decoy location, and waste hours while I made a clean run to the final point in Maine. Chapter 21, The Lighthouse Run. Narrator. I changed my route immediately, pushing the car to its limit. The sun was setting, and I had 8 hours of desolate highway ahead of me. I had to assume they had other surveillance, perhaps even on my finances or my home GPS. But if Clara was right, the final point was a memory, a sentiment, not a registered property. As I drove, I finally opened the blue folder and the research binder again. Clara hadn't just left behind files. She'd left behind instructions. The final page of the research binder contained a list of 3 names. Dr. Vivian Chow, lead scientist on the original reactor project, currently working at a small independent lab in Boston. Attorney Marcus Thorne, a respected patent lawyer known for taking on corporate espionage cases based in New York. Journalist Sarah Chen, an investigative reporter specializing in energy corruption, working for a major international news wire. Clara hadn't intended for me to fight Aegis alone. She had built a network of allies who knew about her original suppressed technology and were waiting for the Variant B file to surface. My mission was clear. Get to the lighthouse, connect with one of these people, and release the files before Aegis found us. The cliffhanger. Narrator. I was 2 hours into my drive when I checked the local news on my phone. A massive mistake. A breaking story scrolled across the screen. A missing person report. Liam's picture was there, labeled as abducted from his home. The report made a vague mention of an unspecified financial dispute. A few minutes later, an anonymous email arrived on my regular phone. A heavily distorted image of Liam, clearly tied up, with a countdown timer superimposed over the photo. The timer read 9:30 time, 9.5 hours. The collector was not just threatening. They were playing for the public eye. They had found the location of the satellite phone decoy and had used the delay to ratchet up the pressure. They were forcing my hand. I was heading towards the lighthouse, a digital weapon in my possession. But the clock for my son was ticking down fast. I had to decide which of Clara's 3 allies could move fastest to help me save Liam and execute the final stage of her plan. At Chapter 22, Choosing the Target. Narrator, George. The image of Liam and the 9-hour countdown timer burned into my mind. I was driving towards the lighthouse, the final point, but I couldn't wait to get there. I had to contact one of Clara's allies now to get a rescue operation in motion. I pulled out the research binder and the list of 3 names. Dr. Chow, scientist, Attorney Thorne, lawyer, and Sarah Chen, journalist. Chow could verify the science, but she had no resources to rescue Liam. Attorney Thorne could offer legal protection, but lawyers moved too slowly. Sarah Chen had the perfect combination: speed and public platform. She was an investigative reporter. Her job was to expose corruption, and she had access to the global media. If I gave her the story, Aegis would face immediate, international scrutiny. It was the only leverage strong enough to force them to release Liam. I pulled out my burner phone, my regular one, since the sat phone was in the creek, and Googled Sarah Chen. I found her professional email address and a temporary contact number. Chapter 23: The Unbelievable Pitch. Narrator. I typed out the email, knowing it sounded insane. I kept it short, using Clara's pre-arranged code word, which was written next to Sarah's name in the research binder. Variant B is ready. Email subject: urgent. Variant B is ready. Aegis Global Energy Corp. Conspiracy. Body: Sarah. My name is George. I am Clara's husband. She was murdered by Aegis to suppress the final version of the cold fusion patent, Variant B. I have the digital model. They have my son, Liam, and a 9-hour deadline. You are on Clara's list. I need you to prepare a massive global media drop. The full file goes to you and the world at 7 a.m. EST, unless Liam is released. Reply to this email with a secure contact line immediately. Do not call the police. The fate of global energy is at stake. I hit send and immediately tossed the phone into a coffee cup filled with water. I couldn't risk the phone being tracked, and the email would force her to move to a secure line. Chapter 24: The Lighthouse. Narrator. I reached the Maine coast just as the sky was beginning to turn a cold, pale gray. The final point: it was a derelict, isolated lighthouse pounded by the Atlantic wind. Clara and I had visited it once, years ago, and she had told me, "This is where the future meets the past, George." I parked the car in a grove of trees a quarter-mile away and walked the rest of the way, the blue folder and the USB inside a waterproof bag. Parentheses. The lighthouse itself was locked, but Clara's meticulousness paid off again. The research binder had a tiny footnote. Under the third rock from the base of the north side, I dug beneath the cold, wet stones and found a small, corroded key. I unlocked the heavy iron door. Inside, the air was cold, metallic, and smelled of salt and rust. The spiral staircase seemed to climb forever. Chapter 25: The Secure Station. Narrator. I reached the top observation deck. It was small, dusty, and empty, except for a built-in metal desk and a small, state-of-the-art satellite communication dish, disguised and embedded into the roof structure. Clara had built a hidden transmission hub right inside our romantic final point. I found a second, secure laptop plugged into the dish. This was the place where she intended to launch her final attack. I connected the USB drive and pulled up the encrypted file. The digital model of Variant B was ready to go global. As I stared at the blinking cursor, my other phone, the burner, not the sat phone, buzzed. It was a text message, a simple word, signal, followed by a new number. It was Sarah Chen. She had responded immediately and understood the gravity. I called the number. Her voice was sharp, professional, and entirely calm. "George, this is Sarah Chen. I am at a secure broadcast location. I believe your wife. I need you to send me the Variant B model and the blue folder patents. I will have our legal team review and our news desk ready for a global release in 3 hours. Tell me what Aegis wants in exchange for your son. They want the files and the silence, I whispered, the relief and terror fighting in my throat. They want everything. But they have Liam, Sarah. The deadline is 9 hours. I need a broadcast ready to stop the timer. Sarah paused for only a second. We launch a threat broadcast in 1 hour. We release a partial story, enough to tell Aegis we have the files and will go public unless Liam is released. Send me the files now, George. The fate of your son and global energy depends on this transmission. The cliffhanger. Narrator. I typed in the password, preparing to send the files. This was the final step of Clara's plan. But I had a terrifying realization. If I sent the entire model, my only leverage was gone. Aegis might just kill Liam and deny everything, betting the public wouldn't believe a grieving husband. I split the file. I sent Sarah the blue folder patents, legal proof, but I kept the full Variant B digital model, the weapon, on the USB drive. Just as the files finished uploading, the metal door at the bottom of the lighthouse slammed open. I heard heavy, fast footsteps pounding up the spiral staircase. They had tracked me. The collector was here, and I was trapped at the final point with the world's most powerful secret in my hand, and Aegis's enforcers were seconds away from the observation deck. How do I escape? And will Sarah Chen's threat broadcast be fast enough to save Liam? And a pause. The heavy, rhythmic thump of boots on the iron spiral staircase was the soundtrack to my final seconds of freedom. They hadn't tracked the satellite phone in the creek. They had simply been following me all along. Perhaps a tracker was embedded in the lockbox. Or maybe they just waited to see where I went after leaving the Redwood Creek house. I had split the file just in time, sending Sarah Chen the blue folder patents, but keeping the core weapon, the Variant B digital model, on the USB drive. It was my only leverage. The door to the observation deck burst open. 2 men stood there. They were professional, large, and dressed in dark, expensive suits. But the one who stepped forward, lean and radiating cold authority, was instantly recognizable from Clara's journal. The collector. He wasn't some hired thug. He was an executive, a clean-cut face of corporate malice. George Walters, the collector said, his voice quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. You've made this incredibly messy. Where is the USB? Chapter 27, The Negotiated Threat. Narrator. I held up the small USB drive. The wind outside howled, rattling the glass of the lighthouse windows. I was terrified, but Clara's spirit, her relentless fight for truth, poured through me. My son, Liam, I stated, keeping my voice steady. Where is he? The collector gave a thin, patronizing smile. The boy is comfortable, a little scared, but unharmed. He'll remain that way, provided you are reasonable. Give me the drive, and we can discuss your settlement. You can return to your life. My wife was murdered, I spat. That's not a negotiation, that's involuntary manslaughter. And I just sent the full patent proof to an investigative journalist. You have 3 hours before they go global. The collector's calm facade cracked slightly. His eyes narrowed. You're lying. You don't have time. The clock for your son is ticking down. He gestured to the 2 guards, who advanced slowly. I'm not lying, I said, pointing to the secure laptop connected to the satellite dish. I sent the patents, but I kept the Variant B digital model. The blueprint, the executable code. The only thing that can actually dismantle your industry. You can destroy the patents, but you can't stop the revolution, unless you have this drive. Chapter 28, The Ticking Clock and the Deal. Narrator. I opened the countdown timer on my phone and placed it on the desk. The remaining time was 8:15 hours. "Here is the only deal," I said, the words surprising even myself with their force. "You call your people. Liam is released unharmed at a public location near his college, and I see him walk away. Only then do I hand over the drive. If you touch him, or if Sarah Chen's threat broadcast is ignored in the next hour, I hit the release all key on this laptop." The collector looked at the secure laptop, then back at me. He knew the risk. The digital model was the gold. The patents were just the legal wrapper. He needed both. He pulled a secure phone from his inner pocket. He spoke in hushed, technical terms to someone on the other end, confirming the leak of the patents to the press. The anxiety was palpable. He hung up, his eyes cold and fixed on mine. "The patents are a nuisance we can legally contain. But the digital model, that is unacceptable. We have an agreement. Liam will be released at the fountain on the main quad of his university in 90 minutes. You will confirm his release. Then you will destroy the USB drive in front of me." "No," I countered. "I hand you the drive. You destroy it. I keep the safety measures." He smiled faintly. "Very well, George. You drive a hard bargain for an accountant. Call me when the boy is free." He took a single step toward the desk. "Now, give me the USB, and we will talk settlement." Chapter 29, The Last Stand. I had to buy time. I needed to know Sarah Chen's threat broadcast had actually gone live. I stalled, moving around the desk. "You took my wife," I whispered, my voice thick with hatred. "She gave her life for this. You won't win." I pushed a button on the secure laptop that I hadn't noticed before. A small, red, unmarked button. Nothing happened. The collector saw the move and barked an order to his guards. "Secure the drive." The two guards lunged. I threw the secure laptop across the room, smashing the satellite dish connection. The collector roared in frustration. I snatched the USB drive and bolted toward the spiral staircase. One guard grabbed my ankle. I fell, the USB skittering across the metal floor. I kicked out wildly, scrambling back to my feet, but the collector was faster. He dove for the drive. Just as his fingers closed around the plastic shell, my own regular phone, the one I had left on a charger in the car, vibrated in my pocket. A massive wave of new notifications hit the screen. I knew what it was. Sarah Chen had launched the threat broadcast. The cliffhanger. The collector looked up, distracted by the sound. I saw the pure, devastating rage in his eyes. He knew his world was collapsing. He had the USB drive, but he had lost control of the narrative. He lunged at me, grabbing my shirt. "You fool! You've ruined everything," he hissed. But before he could finish, the phone in my hand received a single, final, beautiful text message from an unknown number. "He is free. Fountain." Liam was safe. In that moment of shared shock, I had my chance. I slammed my fist into the collector's face, a blow fueled by 2 years of grief and fear. He stumbled back, dropping the USB drive. It hit the floor and bounced, right over the railing and down the dark, spiraling depths of the lighthouse. The USB, the digital key to Clara's global revolution, was gone, lost forever in the darkness below. Liam was safe, but was the fight over? And what new danger awaited me now that the collector had failed and Aegis was publicly exposed? In Chapter 30, The World Reacts. I didn't wait to see what the collector would do. With the sound of the USB drive clattering down the iron void behind me, I scrambled down the staircase and burst out into the biting May morning. I ran to my car and drove, not home, but toward the nearest major city to meet my newly acquired ally, Sarah Chen. Within the hour, the world was in chaos. Sarah Chen's threat broadcast, backed by the legal documents from the blue folder, hit the news desks like a seismic event. The headline was undeniable. Global energy giant Aegis accused of suppressing breakthrough clean energy tech linked to homicide. The market instantly panicked. Aegis global energy stock plummeted, losing billions in hours. Governments across the globe, especially those heavily invested in clean energy initiatives, demanded immediate answers. The narrative was simple and damning. A powerful corporation had murdered a brilliant scientist, Clara, and kidnapped her son, Liam, to bury a technology that would save the planet. Chapter 31: The Reunion and the Reckoning. Narrator: I drove straight to the designated meeting spot, a discreet office building in Boston. Sarah Chen, a woman in her late 30s with a calm intensity, was waiting. She was already surrounded by lawyers and junior reporters, managing the biggest story of her career. The first call I made was to Liam. Hearing his voice, "Dad, where are you? They let me go at the fountain. I was so scared," was the moment the 2 years of grief, paranoia, and fighting finally broke. He was safe. That was the only victory that mattered. Sarah, meanwhile, was all business. "George, the patents, the blue folder, are genuine. Our lawyers have confirmed their validity. They prove Clara invented the Variant B reactor. Aegis is scrambling. Their CEO is denying everything, but the stock crash is irreversible." I explained how the collector had lost the USB drive down the lighthouse. "The digital blueprint is gone, Sarah. Without the executable code, it could take years for engineers to reverse engineer the technology just from the patent documents alone." Sarah paused, a flicker of disappointment crossing her face. "Clara anticipated that, George. The patents are designed to be complex, legally protected, but difficult to replicate quickly. The drive was the catalyst. Aegis won this small battle." Chapter 32: The Second House and the First Ally. Narrator: Sarah's team quickly secured the Redwood Creek house and our main house, finding evidence of surveillance at both locations. The criminal investigation into Clara's death, now escalated to a major corporate murder case, was finally underway. But the biggest strategic move came when Sarah brought me a video call. Dr. Vivian Chow, the lead scientist on Clara's old team, the first ally on the list. Dr. Chow was distraught but resolute. "George, I saw the news. I knew Clara wasn't crazy. When she left Aegis, she warned me they had a plan B to suppress the technology. She told me she was working on a physical backup, not just a digital one." Dr. Chow revealed that Clara had often used the Redwood Creek house as a small clandestine lab. The patent documents are the what, George. The physical prototype is the how. Clara believed a working model would bypass any legal delays Aegis could invent. Chapter 3: The Blueprint of Redemption. Narrator: The search shifted immediately back to the Redwood Creek house. Sarah Chen's team and Dr. Chow flew there, using the detailed notes from Clara's research binder as a guide. I was too emotionally exhausted to go with them, staying close to Liam, but I was on the phone constantly. The breakthrough came when Dr. Chow examined the small bungalow's old, abandoned laundry room. Behind a false wall, Clara hadn't just hidden files, she had hidden a safe. Inside, Dr. Chow found a small, meticulously crafted device that looked like a complicated power core. It was the physical, working prototype of the Variant B cold fusion reactor. Clara hadn't relied on me to be an engineer. She relied on me to get the patents public and let the prototype be found by the right people, her allies. The USB was the fast track. The prototype was the guaranteed victory. The moment Dr. Chow confirmed the prototype was intact, the entire landscape changed. Aegis could no longer deny the technology, and the world had the physical key to a clean energy future. The prototype was secured. Sarah Chen was planning a live, global press conference to unveil the device, ensuring Aegis could never touch it again. The legal and financial doom of the corporate giant was sealed. But as I sat with Liam, watching the news coverage, my phone buzzed with an unknown encrypted message. It wasn't from Aegis or the collector. They were too busy dealing with the fallout. The message was one word, sinister and personal. Mrs. Henderson sends her regards. I looked down at the floor, where I had carelessly dropped the silver locket, the key to the second compartment. It was gone. The seemingly kind, elderly neighbor who knew Clara's secrets was not Clara's ally at all. She was the collector's deeper asset. She was still out there. And she had taken the locket. What role did she play in Clara's death, and what was her final, terrifying move? Chapter 34, The Betrayer Revealed. The chilling message, Mrs. Henderson sends her regards, and the disappearance of the locket was a lightning bolt of realization. The sweet old neighbor, who had initially given me the journal and the warning about the collector, was not a friendly ally. She was a deep-cover operative. The oldest trick in the book, the trustworthy face. She hadn't helped me escape the collector in part 3. She had made sure I ran with the blue folder to a location she knew was compromised. And she had planted the misleading clue about the locket's power back at my main house. She was the one who had been watching the Redwood Creek house after Clara stopped showing up. I immediately called Sarah Chen. The locket is gone. The woman, Mrs. Henderson, she's not a neighbor. She's the last piece of Aegis's operation. Sarah's team quickly investigated. Mrs. Henderson's cottage was empty. The real owner was a shell corporation linked to Aegis Global Energy. She wasn't just a spy. She was a cleanup artist, tasked with monitoring the secret house and destroying evidence if Clara died. She only gave me the journal because she thought I would lead the collector to the digital model, which she couldn't risk handling herself. Chapter 35, The True Price of the Locket. Narrator, but why take the locket now, after Aegis was in ruin and the prototype was found? The locket wasn't just a key. It was the final, sentimental item from the lockbox. It contained a baby photo of Liam. I realized my fatal flaw. The locket was a personalized tracker. Clara, in her meticulous paranoia, had foreseen that Aegis might try to follow any item I retrieved. She used the locket not to open the chest, but to signal the chest's location if it was moved. Mrs. Henderson had taken the locket to ensure that Aegis's final asset could never be tracked. The true, final secret was that Clara's trust had been misplaced, but her overall plan, getting the patents and the prototype out, remained flawless. Her death had been necessary to Aegis, but her genius had ensured their downfall. Chapter 36, The Reckoning and the Fall of Aegis. Narrator. 2 days later, the Variant B prototype was unveiled to the world. Sarah Chen held a press conference that was broadcast on every major global network. Dr. Vivian Chow demonstrated the small, elegant device that could generate clean, cheap energy with virtually no waste. The impact was immediate. Aegis Global Energy's stock was suspended. Criminal investigations, fueled by the evidence in the blue folder and Sarah's reporting, led to the immediate arrest of the CEO and the collector on charges of corporate espionage, conspiracy, and the first-ever corporate homicide charge linked to the suppression of climate technology. The era of fossil fuel dominance was shattered. Clara's invention was immediately declared a global resource, and the profits from the patents were funneled into a foundation dedicated to clean energy research and environmental justice. Chapter 37, The Widow's Sanctuary. Narrator. Liam and I returned to our suburban home, but it wasn't the same. It was no longer a place of quiet grief, but a place of difficult, painful truth. Liam was devastated to learn about his mother's murder and her double life, but he was fiercely proud of her courage. The most profound change came with the Redwood Creek house, the one I had lied about, the one I had tried to conceal from my son. Liam and I drove there together. We stood in the small living room. "Why didn't you tell me, Dad?" Liam asked, his voice low. "I was afraid the secret would taint her memory," I admitted. "I was afraid of what it meant about us. But I was wrong, Liam. It wasn't a sanctuary from us. It was a place she went to save the world for us." We decided not to sell the house. Instead, we transformed the bungalow into the Clara Walters Research Center, a small, independent lab dedicated to advancing her work. The walls were no longer hiding secrets. They were nurturing a brighter future. Liam didn't take the tuition money from the settlement. Instead, inspired by his mother's brilliance, he changed his major from business to environmental engineering. Final chapter: The Unbroken Light. Narrator: I never saw Mrs. Henderson again. She vanished, another shadow that ages had left behind. But her final act, taking the locket, served as a permanent reminder. The fight for truth never truly ends. I learned that Clara's final message to me was the most profound lesson of my life. It wasn't about the money, the secrets, or the technology. It was about courage. She didn't want a quiet life. She wanted a meaningful one. Our marriage hadn't been a lie. It had been the foundation that gave her the strength to fight. The widow's secret didn't tear our family apart. It bound us together in a shared legacy of bravery. I walk through our house now, and I no longer see just a widower. I see the reluctant hero who, armed with his wife's love and a powerful truth, exposed one of the biggest corporate crimes in history. And whenever I need to feel her presence, I simply look towards the coast, towards the final point, where her light will shine, clean and unbroken, forever.